a rancher humiliated for defending an elderly Apache woman, but he won her daughter's heart. He woke up every morning before the sun, fed the cattle, checked the fences, and worked on his small ranch that had been in his family for generations. Life was simple, predictable, and peaceful, or at least it had been. He enjoyed the routine, the smell of fresh hay, and the feeling of soil under his boots. John had never been one to seek attention. In fact, most people in the nearby town barely knew him. He kept to himself, his work, and his animals. That particular afternoon, the sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, painting the sky with soft oranges and pinks. John was walking along a narrow path that ran near the edge of the desert. His eyes scanned the horizon for any signs of trouble among the herd. That's when he noticed her, a small, elderly woman struggling to carry a bundle of firewood. Her movements were slow and cautious, each step a careful effort to keep her balance on the uneven, muddy path. John knew the woman was from the Apache community that lived nearby. He had seen her a few times in the town, though they had never spoken. She moved with a quiet dignity, though the years had clearly weighed heavily on her. As he watched her, John's instinct told him something was wrong. The path wasn't empty. A group of young men from the town were nearby, clearly observing her. They laughed loudly, and one of them stepped forward, pretending to trip her with a stick. John's first reaction was anger, though he forced himself to remain calm. He didn't want to escalate the situation, but he couldn't just watch. He moved quickly, his long legs closing the distance between him and the group in a few strides. "Hey, leave her alone," he called out, his voice firm but controlled. The young men turned, surprised to see the rancher approaching. "What's it to you, Miller?" One of them sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "It's none of your business." John didn't respond with words this time. He stepped closer, placing himself between the woman and the men. The elderly woman's eyes widened slightly, a mix of fear and relief. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. John's presence alone was a shield. The young men laughed again, thinking this was a joke. They underestimated John's determination. With a calm but firm tone, he said, "I'm not asking, I'm telling, step back." There was a pause. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying the tension of the moment. Then one of the men lunged forward, trying to grab the bundle of firewood. John moved quickly, stepping aside just enough to block the man without striking him. He held his ground, not with aggression but with authority. There was something in John's eyes, a quiet strength that made it clear he wouldn't be intimidated. Finally, realizing they weren't going to scare him, the men backed off, muttering insults under their breath. They walked away, but not without glancing back, measuring John as if trying to understand why he dared to interfere. The elderly woman, White Feather, finally let out a small, relieved sigh. She looked at John, her face softening with gratitude. "Thank you," she said in a gentle voice. Her words were simple, but they carried warmth, respect, and a hint of curiosity. John nodded, brushing the dust from his jeans. "It's nothing," he said quietly. "Just making sure you're safe." White Feather's hands shook slightly as she adjusted her bundle. "Not many would have stopped," she said, her eyes studying him with quiet interest. "You have courage, young man." John shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Courage wasn't something he thought about. It was just what he did when it felt right. "I can't just watch people get hurt," he replied simply. For a moment they stood there in silence, the sun casting long shadows across the path. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. John realized that even though he had acted out of instinct, this small act of defense had already created a connection, however brief, with someone whose life he had touched. But the moment of satisfaction didn't last long. As John walked back to his ranch, he began to notice whispers and sideways glances from people in the town. By the time he returned home, he heard the gossip spreading like wildfire. Miller interfered again, some said. "Why can't he mind his own business?" others muttered. John tried to ignore it, but it stung. He had never sought approval or attention, but the cold judgment of the townspeople was hard to brush off. That night, as he sat by the fire in his small cabin, John thought about what had happened. He wasn't a man who liked conflict, but he couldn't regret his actions. There was a line between right and wrong, and he had crossed it to protect someone who needed help. The thought gave him some comfort, even as the whispers outside reminded him that courage often comes with a cost. Days passed, and life on the ranch returned to its usual rhythm. But John couldn't shake the image of White Feather, her gentle smile and the quiet strength in her eyes. Occasionally, he would see her in the distance, gathering wood or walking along the dusty trails. Each time, a sense of responsibility and respect grew in him. She had lived a long life, full of challenges, and here she was, still standing, still carrying her burdens with dignity. The town's attitude toward John remained frosty. Some neighbors avoided him, shopkeepers gave curt nods instead of friendly greetings, and even old friends hesitated before speaking. Yet, in the midst of all this, John felt something shift within him. The encounter had awakened a sense of purpose beyond his daily routines. It wasn't just about tending cattle or fixing fences anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the personal cost. One afternoon, as John repaired a broken fence near the edge of his property, he saw White Feather approaching again. She carried a small basket this time, and her movements were slower, more careful. When she reached him, she stopped and offered a nod of acknowledgement. John returned it with a slight smile. "I wanted to thank you again," she said softly. Not many would risk themselves for an old woman. John shook his head. It wasn't risk. It was the right thing to do. White Feather studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to understand a man who was both ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. "You are different from the others," she said finally. "You act with honor." John felt a warmth in his chest at her words, though he quickly hid it. Compliments weren't something he was used to, and he wasn't sure how to respond. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means a lot." As she walked away, John watched her carefully. Something about this encounter lingered in his mind. He realized that life was unpredictable. Even in the quietest places, small moments could ripple outward, changing the way people saw each other and even themselves. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he sensed that this was only the beginning of a story he hadn't yet fully understood. That evening, John sat on the porch, looking out at the sunset over his ranch. The colors were deeper, richer than usual, as if the world itself was trying to tell him something. He felt a strange mix of emotions, pride in what he had done, sadness at the whispers and judgment of others, and a quiet anticipation for what might come next. For the first time in a long while, John realized that courage wasn't just about fighting or protecting. It was about living with integrity, standing by one's beliefs, and sometimes facing the disapproval of those who didn't understand. And somewhere in the distance, he felt the presence of someone who would soon become more than just a figure in his memory. Little did he know, this small act of kindness and bravery would set in motion a series of events that would change his life forever, introducing him to a world of compassion, love, and challenges he had never imagined. And so, as the night settled over the ranch and the stars began to twinkle above, John Miller, the quiet, humble rancher, prepared for a journey he had never sought but was about to embrace, one where courage, honor, and the heart would guide him in ways he could never predict. Days after John's defense of White Feather were filled with quiet tension. Life on the ranch went on as usual, feeding cattle, mending fences, and checking the water troughs, but something had changed in the air around town. Rumors traveled faster than wind across the plains. People whispered about John at the general store, at the saloon, and even at church. Some called him brave, but most murmured about how he interfered and caused trouble. It was a difficult time for him. John had never cared much about what others thought, yet the cold stares and murmurs left a mark. Even familiar faces avoided eye contact, and neighbors who used to wave politely now only offered curt nods. He tried not to let it bother him, focusing instead on his work. The ranch needed constant attention, and he preferred the company of his cattle to the judgment of townspeople. Still, at night, when he sat by the fire in his cabin, he could not ignore the loneliness creeping into his thoughts. Meanwhile, White Feather visited him occasionally. Each visit was brief, polite, and always respectful. She brought small gifts, fresh herbs from the forest, a handful of dried corn, or sometimes a little bread. She never lingered long, but her presence was comforting. Her calm voice and gentle smile were a quiet reminder of why John had acted in the first place. These visits, though short, began to lift the weight of isolation he felt. One afternoon, as John worked repairing a broken fence near the edge of his property, White Feather approached again. Her steps were slower than before, and her bundle of firewood seemed heavier this time. John stopped his work and walked toward her. "Let me help you with that," he said. She shook her head politely, though he noticed her hesitation. "I am grateful, but it is my responsibility," she replied softly. "I must carry my own burdens." John respected her answer, though he gently insisted on taking part of the load. Together they carried the wood to her cabin, walking side by side in silence. The path was dusty, and the sun beat down on them, but there was a strange comfort in the quiet. John was learning that courage and kindness often carried no applause, yet they created bonds that could not be measured. When they reached her cabin, White Feather invited him to sit. She offered some water in a small clay cup. The cabin was modest, with walls made from sun-baked clay and a roof patched with branches and dried grass. Inside, the air smelled faintly of herbs and the warm aroma of cooked food. John observed her carefully. Though small in stature, she carried an inner strength that seemed to fill the room. "I want you to know," she said, "that what you did that day, it was rare. Not many people would have stood up for me." John looked down at his boots, unsure how to respond. "I only did what I felt was right," he said quietly. "I couldn't just stand there and watch them hurt you." White Feather studied him for a long moment. Her eyes, wise and calm, seemed to look into his soul. "You are not like the others," she said finally. "You have a heart that listens to the truth, even when it is hard." The conversation was simple, yet it left a lasting impression on John. He realized that moments of courage often went unnoticed by the world, but were seen and remembered by those whose lives they touched. White Feather's acknowledgement warmed him in a way that the approval of townspeople never could. Over the following weeks, their encounters became more frequent. John began to understand the rhythms of her life. The way she tended a small garden behind her cabin, gathered firewood in the early mornings, and prepared meals with quiet care. He started bringing her supplies from his ranch, extra flour, fresh milk, and vegetables. At first she resisted, insisting she could manage on her own, but John's persistence was gentle, respectful, and unwavering. During one visit, she shared stories about her life. She spoke of her ancestors, of the traditions they preserved, and of the hardships she had endured. John listened intently, fascinated by her strength and resilience. He learned about her daughter, Ayana, though White Feather mentioned her only briefly, hinting at a young woman who was spirited, independent, and full of life. John felt a flicker of curiosity about this daughter, though he did not yet know her. Life in the town, however, was not so simple. The gossip continued. Some townspeople openly mocked him, calling him the troublemaker or that fool who meddles. A few even tried to avoid selling him supplies, suggesting he had lost their trust. John felt the sting of isolation more sharply now, knowing that standing for what was right sometimes came at the cost of acceptance. Yet, he did not waver. Each visit to White Feather reminded him why courage mattered more than comfort. One evening, as John was returning from town with supplies for the elderly woman, he noticed movement near the edge of her cabin. A young woman was tending the garden, carefully planting seeds with nimble fingers. Her hair was dark and flowed freely down her back. Her movements were confident yet gentle. John slowed down, unsure if he should approach. White Feather noticed his hesitation. "That is my daughter, Ayana," she said softly. "She has been away from the town for a time, learning, growing, and helping others in her own way." John felt a strange warmth in his chest. Ayana's presence was commanding without words. She looked up briefly, meeting his gaze, and offered a polite nod. It was simple, but in that moment, John felt a quiet connection forming. He could see the curiosity and intelligence in her eyes, and he sensed that she had a spirit much like her mother, strong, independent, and unafraid to face life's challenges. From that day, his visits became more intentional. He found excuses to stop by, often helping with chores or carrying heavier supplies. Gianna was wary at first, keeping a polite distance, yet she did not dismiss him. Slowly, their interactions grew. Small talk turned into shared stories about life, work, and family. John realized that these moments, though ordinary in appearance, were building the foundation for trust and understanding. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a broken section of the garden fence, Ayana spoke quietly. "I've heard the town doesn't look kindly on you," she said. Her tone was not mocking but filled with quiet concern. John nodded. "Some people don't understand why I do what I do. They judge quickly and rarely listen to the truth." Ayana studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "It takes strength to do what's right, even when others don't approve," she said. "I respect that." John felt a warmth spread through him. It was the first time someone had acknowledged his actions without prejudice. In that moment, he realized that courage was not just about standing up for others. It was also about staying true to oneself, even when the world turned its back. As the weeks passed, their bond grew steadily. John learned more about Ayana's life, her dreams, and her values. She was intelligent, compassionate, and strong-willed. She shared her thoughts about the world, her hopes for her community, and her love for her mother. John found himself admiring her more with each passing day, not just for her beauty or grace, but for the depth of her character. White Feather observed the growing connection with quiet approval. She noticed the respect and care John showed toward her daughter and felt a sense of relief. For years, she had worried about Ayana finding someone trustworthy, someone who would treat her with honor. Now she could see that John's intentions were pure, his actions guided by integrity rather than desire or vanity. Despite the warmth of these new relationships, John never lost sight of the reality outside the cabin. The town continued to gossip, and whispers of disapproval followed him wherever he went. He faced mockery from strangers and subtle hostility from some neighbors. Yet the moments with White Feather and Ayana reminded him why standing firm in one's beliefs was worth every scornful look and whispered insult. By the end of the second month, John felt a quiet transformation within himself. He had come to understand that courage was not just about moments of physical bravery, but also about the perseverance to act kindly and honestly, even when recognition was absent. His life, once defined solely by routines and solitude, now had deeper meaning. He was no longer just a rancher tending cattle. He had become a protector, a friend, and someone who could make a meaningful difference in the lives of others. And so, each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the desert sky glowed with orange and purple hues, John Miller returned to his ranch with a quiet sense of purpose. He knew that life would not always be easy, and judgment would always follow acts of courage, but he also knew that true strength came from kindness, honor, and loyalty. Little did he know, his growing connection with White Feather and her daughter Ayana was only the beginning. The days ahead would test his courage in ways he had never imagined, challenge his patience, and eventually lead to a bond that went far beyond simple gratitude or respect. The foundation of trust, kindness, and quiet bravery had been laid, and soon, Life would demand that he build upon it in ways both unexpected and remarkable. John Miller's days had begun to take on a rhythm that was different from the solitary routine he had always known. His visits to White Feather's cabin, initially casual and brief, were now moments he eagerly anticipated. Each day, he found himself thinking not just about the work he needed to do on his ranch, but about the small conversations, shared silences, and quiet companionship he experienced with the elderly woman and, increasingly, with her daughter, Yana. Yana was a remarkable young woman. She carried herself with confidence, yet there was a gentleness in the way she interacted with the world. Her hands, though small, were strong from years of tending the land, caring for her mother, and learning the traditions of her people. Her eyes, dark and thoughtful, held a spark of curiosity that intrigued John more and more with each encounter. He had never met anyone quite like her, and he found that simple tasks, carrying firewood, repairing fences, fetching water, suddenly became opportunities to be near her. One afternoon, the sun was high, and the air shimmered with heat. John was helping Yana plant a row of corn in the small garden behind the cabin. She was kneeling in the dirt, carefully pressing seeds into the soil, while John handed her the next handful. For a moment they worked in silence, the only sounds the soft rustle of the wind through the nearby trees and the occasional call of a bird. "You have a gentle touch," John said finally, breaking the silence. "Not many people care enough to be careful with something so small." Yana looked up and smiled, a soft, knowing expression. "It's not just about care," she said. "It's about respect. Every seed, every plant, every life matters. You can't just rush through and expect good things to happen." John nodded thoughtfully. Her words struck a chord. He realized that courage, which he had once only measured in moments of action, also existed in patience, attention, and respect. Yana's outlook on life was simple yet profound, and he found himself learning from her as much as she might have been learning from him. Their work continued side by side, each helping the other in small, meaningful ways. John would fetch water for the plants, carefully carrying the heavy pail, while Yana ensured the soil around the young corn plants was firm and protected. They shared small stories about their lives, the way the ranch had been in John's family for generations, and the lessons Yana had learned from her mother and ancestors. They spoke of hardships and joys, of the challenges of living in a place where the land could be both a friend and a harsh teacher. As the weeks passed, John realized that he was drawn to Yana in a way he had never been drawn to anyone before. It wasn't just admiration for her strength or respect for her intelligence. It was something deeper, a quiet warmth that grew each time they spoke, laughed, or worked together. Yet he was careful. He knew that trust and respect were earned, not demanded, and he was determined to move slowly, ensuring that any bond between them was genuine and strong. One evening, after a long day of work, John and Yana sat on the porch of the cabin, their legs dangling over the edge as the sky turned shades of pink and gold. White Feather had gone inside to prepare supper, leaving them alone for a moment of quiet reflection. "You've changed the way I see this place," Yana said softly, her voice almost lost in the gentle evening breeze. "Before it felt like a lonely, hard life, but now it feels alive, full of possibilities." John looked at her surprised. "Me?" he asked, a small smile forming. "Yes," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "You've shown me that courage isn't always loud or violent. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's gentle, and sometimes it's just being willing to stand by what's right, even when no one else will." John felt a warmth spread through him. Her words were not praise in the way townspeople might give it. They were sincere, thoughtful, and filled with understanding. In that moment, he realized that the connection he felt with Yana was mutual, and it was more meaningful than anything he had experienced before. Their conversations continued to grow deeper over time. They spoke of dreams, of hopes for the future, and of the ways they wished to make the world better, even in small ways. John shared stories of his family and the ranch, tales of hardship and triumph, while Ayanna spoke of her mother, her heritage, and the lessons she had learned from the land and her ancestors. Each conversation revealed more of their character, and each moment together strengthened the bond between them. It wasn't all easy, of course. There were moments of awkwardness, of uncertainty, when John wasn't sure if he was overstepping or if Ayanna truly welcomed his presence. She was independent and strong-willed, and she had learned to rely on herself. Yet slowly, she began to see that John's intentions were pure, that his presence brought comfort and support rather than expectation or pressure. One afternoon, as they worked together mending a broken fence near the edge of the property, a sudden gust of wind knocked a bundle of tools to the ground. John bent down to pick them up, and Ayanna reached to help. Their hands brushed, and for a moment both paused, feeling a connection that went beyond words. They smiled at each other, shy but understanding, and continued their work, the unspoken moment lingering between them. John began to notice small details about Ayanna that made him smile. How she laughed when a bird landed nearby, the way she carefully tied her hair back before working, and how she always made sure to include her mother in every decision. He admired her strength, her compassion, and her ability to see the world with clarity and kindness. Ayanna, in turn, noticed John's quiet determination, his unwavering respect, and his willingness to help without expectation. She saw a man who valued integrity over popularity, who acted according to his conscience rather than the opinions of others. Slowly, admiration grew into something more, a quiet affection that neither of them could fully explain, yet both felt deeply. One day, as John was leaving the cabin after helping repair a section of the roof, Ayanna called out to him. "Wait," she said. I wanted to thank you, not just for the help, but for being someone we can trust." John paused, surprised. "You don't have to thank me," he said gently. "I do," she insisted. "It's not easy to find someone who acts without asking for anything in return, someone who stands up for what's right even when it's hard. You've shown us that. You've shown me that." Her words touched John deeply. He realized that this young woman, whom he had come to admire and respect, had also begun to see him in a way that went beyond mere friendship or gratitude. And though neither of them spoke of love directly, the feeling was present, growing quietly between them like the young corn in the garden, nurtured with care, patience, and hope. As the weeks turned into months, John found that his life had changed in ways he could never have predicted. The once lonely ranch now felt connected to something larger, a small community of trust, respect, and quiet courage. White Feather's presence was a constant reminder of wisdom and patience, while Ayanna brought energy, hope, and a gentle challenge to his understanding of the world. Despite the challenges from the town, despite the whispers and judgment, John felt stronger than ever. He knew that standing for what was right could bring disapproval and loneliness, but he had also discovered that it could bring trust, connection, and even love. His bond with Ayanna was proof of that. One evening, as the sun set and the sky filled with deep shades of red and purple, John and Ayanna sat together on the porch, watching the stars begin to twinkle. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and filled with understanding. John realized that this connection, this quiet, growing bond, was something he had been waiting for even if he didn't know it. Little did he know, the days ahead would test that bond. Challenges from outside the cabin, from townspeople who refused to accept him, and from dangers that threatened White Feather and Ayanna would soon push John to his limits. But for now, in this quiet moment, he allowed himself to feel hope, warmth, and the first stirrings of love for a woman who had captured his heart without even trying. And so, John Miller's life, once defined by solitude and routine, was beginning to change. The quiet rancher had found companionship, trust, and a sense of purpose that went beyond the cattle and fences he tended. He had discovered that courage, kindness, and respect could create bonds that no challenge could easily break. And as he watched Ayana smile softly under the evening sky, he knew that the story of their connection was only just beginning. Life had begun to settle into a gentle rhythm for John Miller, White Feather, and Ayana. Days were filled with work on the ranch, tending to the garden and sharing quiet moments together. Yet, as often happens in life, peace can be fragile and trouble sometimes arrives when least expected. John had grown used to the whispers and judgment of the townspeople, but he hoped his presence near the Apache family would remain a source of quiet support rather than conflict. One late afternoon, as John was leading his cattle to the pasture, he noticed movement near the edge of the forest. His instincts told him something was wrong. Squinting in the fading light, he saw the same group of men who had mocked White Feather weeks before. They were gathered near the cabin, their gestures aggressive, and it was clear they intended to intimidate the family. John's heart sank. He knew he could not stand by and watch harm come to the woman who had trusted him, or to Ayana, who had grown close to him in ways that stirred his heart. Without hesitation, he left the herd to graze safely in the meadow and strode toward the cabin, his hands steady, his mind focused. As he approached, the men noticed him. One stepped forward, a sneer on his face. "Back again, Miller," he taunted. "You think you can stop us this time?" John's voice was calm but firm. "Leave them alone. You won't threaten this family." The men laughed, but there was a tension in the air. John's presence had a weight to it now. He had defended them once before, and it was clear he would do so again if needed. The men's bravado faltered slightly as they recognized his determination. Inside the cabin, White Feather and Ayana were aware of the approaching danger. Ayana's eyes were fierce, and though fear fluttered in her chest, she refused to hide. She knew John would protect them, but she also knew the danger was real. White Feather moved quietly to the corner of the cabin, watching John carefully, her hands folded, a silent prayer on her lips. The confrontation began subtly. One of the men reached for the garden tools, intending to intimidate the family. John stepped forward swiftly, placing himself between the man and the young woman. "I warned you," he said. His voice carried authority that left no room for argument. The man hesitated, surprised by John's confidence. "You think you can stop us alone?" he sneered. "I don't think," John replied steadily. "I know." It was not a moment of loud fighting or physical aggression at first. John's strength lay in his courage, his unwavering stance, and his refusal to let fear dictate his actions. The men tried to push past him, but John's steady presence, combined with the clear message that he would not back down, created a barrier they were unprepared to face. Ayana, seeing John protect her and her mother, felt a surge of admiration and gratitude. She realized that the man she had come to trust and care for was not only brave but also honorable. His actions were not driven by pride or anger. They were guided by a sense of justice and loyalty. She felt a warmth in her heart, a quiet recognition that John's courage went far beyond physical strength. The tension escalated as one of the men tried to grab a small bundle from the garden. John moved quickly, blocking the man's path. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the dry rustle of leaves in the evening wind. Finally, the man stepped back, realizing that John's determination was unshakable. White Feather, watching from the cabin, felt a mixture of relief and pride. She had raised Ayana to be strong and independent, but seeing John stand so firmly for them reminded her that courage could take many forms. It was not just the act of defending against danger but the willingness to act, to protect those who could not defend themselves, and to do so without hesitation. After the men finally left, muttering threats under their breath, John turned to check on Ayana and White Feather. "Are you both all right?" he asked. Ayana nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thanks to you," she said softly. "I don't know what we would have done without you." John smiled gently. "You both need to be safe, that's all that matters." That evening, the three of them sat quietly in the cabin. The danger had passed, but the sense of connection and trust had grown even stronger. John realized that courage often came with challenges, but it also brought people closer together. The bond between him, White Feather, and Ayanna had been strengthened, and he felt a deep sense of responsibility and care for their well-being. Over the next few days, John took extra precautions around the cabin. He repaired the fences, strengthened doors, and made sure the surrounding area was secure. Each action was a silent promise that he would continue to protect the family, no matter the obstacles. Ayanna watched him work, her admiration for him growing with each passing day. She saw not only his physical strength but also his intelligence, patience, and unwavering commitment. Their relationship deepened naturally during this time. They shared small moments, preparing meals together, fetching water, and repairing the garden. Each task, though simple, became a way to understand and support one another. John began to see Ayanna's quiet strength, her wisdom, and her compassion in ways that went far beyond appearances. Ayanna, in turn, saw John's integrity, his reliability, and his courage, recognizing that he was someone who could be trusted with her heart and the safety of her family. One afternoon, while fixing a broken section of the cabin's roof, John and Ayanna shared a rare moment of quiet conversation. "You've done so much for us," Ayanna said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." John shook his head, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "I did what anyone would do if they could. I just happened to care enough to act." Ayanna smiled, a mixture of admiration and something deeper reflected in her eyes. "Not everyone would. That's what makes you different. That's why I trust you, and why I feel safe when you're near." John felt a warmth in his chest. Her words were gentle, honest, and full of meaning. He realized that their connection had grown beyond friendship. There was a bond of trust, respect, and quiet affection, something neither of them had rushed or forced, but something that had blossomed naturally through shared experiences and mutual care. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, John and Ayanna sat together on the porch. The air was cool, and the world seemed to hold its breath. John realized that moments like this were rare, moments where courage, love, and trust intertwined to create something precious and lasting. He looked at Ayanna and felt a sense of peace, knowing that despite the challenges they faced, they were not alone. White Feather joined them soon after, carrying a small tray of food. She smiled, her eyes reflecting pride and contentment. "You've done well, John," she said softly. "Not just in protecting us, but in showing Ayanna the value of trust, courage, and integrity." John nodded humbly. "I only did what I felt was right. That's all anyone can do." The evening passed quietly, filled with conversation, laughter, and the warmth of companionship. John knew that challenges would come again. There were always those who could not understand or accept what he represented. But he also knew that the bond he had formed with White Feather and Ayanna was strong enough to withstand anything. In the following weeks, life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. The townspeople continued their gossip, but John no longer paid it much attention. His focus was on the family he had come to care for deeply and on the growing connection with Ayanna. Together, they repaired the garden, tended the animals, and prepared for the coming seasons. Each day was an opportunity to strengthen their bond, deepen their trust, and continue building a life rooted in respect, courage, and kindness. John realized that true courage was not only about facing immediate danger, but also about standing firm in one's values, protecting those who cannot protect themselves, and nurturing relationships built on trust and respect. His actions had created a ripple effect, inspiring admiration and gratitude, and showing Ayanna the depth of his character. By the end of this period, John and Ayanna's connection had grown undeniable. Though neither had spoken of love explicitly, it was present in their shared glances, small gestures, and quiet companionship. John had become more than a protector. He had become a trusted friend, a source of comfort, and someone who had captured the heart of a remarkable young woman. And so, life moved forward. John Miller, the quiet rancher who had once only known solitude, now faced challenges with courage, supported by trust and growing affection. The events of that season had shown him that bravery was meaningful when combined with care, that strength was valuable when guided by honor, and that love could quietly blossom in even the most difficult circumstances. Little did John know, the story of courage, trust, and the heart's quiet triumph was far from over. Challenges, choices, and the unpredictable turns of life would soon test not only his bravery, but also the bond he shared with Ayanna, pushing him to act in ways that would define both his character and their future together. The months that followed the confrontation at the cabin were filled with quiet but meaningful change. Life on the ranch and in the surrounding area slowly began to feel different, not because the challenges had disappeared, but because John Miller's courage and steadfastness had begun to create ripples that the townspeople could no longer ignore. John continued his work with the same quiet diligence he had always shown. Each morning, he rose before the sun, tending to his cattle and fixing fences, but now his thoughts often lingered on White Feather and Ayanna. He had grown deeply connected to both of them, not only because he admired their strength and wisdom, but also because they had become a central part of his life. Their safety, comfort, and happiness had become his responsibility, and he carried it with pride rather than burden. Ayanna, too, had grown in ways she had never expected. Watching John act with courage, kindness, and integrity had changed her perception of what it meant to trust someone fully. She had seen him stand for what was right, even in the face of judgment, danger, and isolation. His actions had quietly inspired her to believe that people could act with honesty, bravery, and selflessness, and she had come to rely on his guidance, his strength, and his unwavering support. One bright morning, as John repaired the fence along the edge of his property, Ayanna approached carrying a small basket of freshly picked vegetables. "John," she called gently, "I wanted to bring these for you and the cattle. They're from the garden." John looked up, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Thank you, Ayanna, that's thoughtful of you." She blushed slightly and placed the basket on the fence. "It's the least I can do," she said softly. "You've done so much for us, and you've always been here when we needed you." John nodded, touched by her words. "I only did what felt right. That's all anyone can do." As they worked together to secure the fence, a gentle camaraderie grew between them. They spoke of everyday things, plans for the garden, the health of the cattle the coming season. But beneath the surface, a quiet affection was forming, built on shared experiences, trust, and admiration. Neither rushed the feeling, yet it was undeniable. Over the next few weeks, the townspeople began to notice the changes in John. The whispers and judgmental glances started to fade as more and more people observed the unwavering integrity he displayed. Some who had once mocked him came to understand that his actions were not reckless or self-serving, but guided by principle and honor. Small gestures, helping neighbors, ensuring the safety of animals, and treating everyone with fairness began to soften their perceptions. One afternoon, John received an unexpected visit from one of the men who had threatened White Feather and Ayanna months earlier. The man approached cautiously, his expression a mixture of hesitation and respect. "Miller," he said, I want to apologize for the way I acted before. I see now that you stand for what's right and we judged you too quickly." John studied him quietly, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "It's never too late to do the right thing." This moment was a turning point. Slowly, others began to acknowledge John's character, and the isolation that had once surrounded him began to lift. For the first time, he felt a sense of acceptance, not because he had changed who he was, but because the truth of his integrity could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, his relationship with Ayana continued to blossom. They spent long hours together in the garden, working side by side, talking about life, and sharing small moments of laughter. John admired her strength, intelligence, and compassion, while Ayana appreciated his unwavering support, humility, and bravery. Their bond was no longer just trust. It had deepened into a quiet, steady affection. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in shades of gold and pink, John and Ayana sat together on the porch of White Feather's cabin. The air was cool and a gentle breeze carried the scent of herbs from the garden. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear. "Ayana," John said finally, his voice soft, I've come to care for you deeply. More than I expected, more than I can explain." Ayana turned to him, her eyes reflecting the glow of the fading sun. She reached out, placing her hand gently on his. "John," she whispered, "I feel the same way. You've shown me what courage, kindness, and honesty really mean. And I've come to trust and care for you more than anyone I've ever known." In that quiet moment, surrounded by the beauty of the desert and the warmth of shared hearts, their connection was no longer unspoken. It was clear, steady, and real. A bond had formed that went beyond words, built on trust, respect, and the courage to act with integrity even in the face of judgment and danger. The following weeks were filled with shared joy and small celebrations. John and Ayana worked together to improve the cabin, expand the garden, and care for the land and animals. White Feather watched with quiet satisfaction, knowing that her daughter had found someone who would protect, respect, and cherish her. The three of them formed a little family, grounded in trust, courage, and love. News of John's integrity eventually reached the townspeople more widely. Stories of his bravery, his assistance to the Apache family, and his unwavering honesty spread through the community. Many who had doubted or mocked him now approached with respect. Shopkeepers greeted him politely, neighbors offered friendly nods, and even those who had previously avoided him began to seek his guidance or assistance. John, however, remained humble. He never sought recognition. His actions had always been guided by principle rather than the desire for approval. Ayana noticed the change too, and she admired John not only for his courage and kindness, but also for his humility. She realized that he had become a man who was strong, honest, and deeply dependable, a man worthy of trust, respect, and love. One day, as they finished repairing a section of the fence together, John turned to Ayana and said, "I know life isn't always easy. There will be challenges ahead and the world doesn't always appreciate what is right. But I promise you this, I will always stand by you and your mother. You can count on me." Ayana smiled, her eyes shining. "And I promise to stand by you too, John. We'll face whatever comes together." In the months that followed, their bond grew even stronger. Together, they faced small hardships, unexpected storms, stubborn cattle, and the usual demands of ranch life. But each challenge only deepened their connection. They celebrated successes together, shared quiet moments of laughter, and found comfort in each other's presence. Eventually, the townspeople fully recognized John's character. No longer seen as a troublemaker or outsider, he became a respected member of the community. His courage, integrity, and kindness had won the hearts of many, but more importantly, he had earned the trust and affection of the two people who mattered most, White Feather and Ayana. One evening, as the sun set and the desert sky glowed with brilliant shades of orange and purple, John and Ayana sat together on the porch. White Feather brought them tea, smiling quietly as she watched them. The air was filled with a sense of peace, warmth, and shared happiness. John reached for Ayana's hand, holding it gently. "I never imagined my life would be like this," he said. "I never expected to find trust, friendship, and love in the way I have with you." Yana leaned closer, resting her head slightly against his shoulder. "I never imagined it either," she whispered. "But I am grateful every day that we found each other. You've shown me the meaning of courage, kindness, and honor." In that moment, surrounded by the soft glow of the setting sun, the three of them, John, Ayana, and White Feather, felt a sense of completion. Their journey had been filled with challenges, judgment, and moments of doubt, but they had faced it all together. Trust had been built, bonds had been strengthened, and love had quietly blossomed. John Miller, once a solitary rancher, had found not only purpose and courage but also a family and a deep, abiding love. Yana, once cautious and independent, had discovered a partner who respected, protected, and cherished her. And White Feather, the wise and gentle matriarch, had seen her daughter find safety, happiness, and the promise of a future filled with love. As the stars twinkled above and the desert night settled around them, John realized that true courage was more than standing against danger. It was standing for what is right, caring for others, and being willing to love and trust. Their lives were intertwined now, bound by bravery, kindness, and the heart's quiet triumph. And so, life continued, filled with hope, love, and the knowledge that the bonds they had built would endure whatever challenges the future might bring. The rancher who once walked alone had found his place, his family, and the woman who had captured his heart, and together, they faced the world with courage, integrity, and unwavering love.